Morning, welcome to my podcast, You Save You. Thank you for tuning in this morning. And the reason I'm doing this podcast is because I've always been a creative. I'm just intrigued by people, how they tick, their beliefs, how that feeds into their business. And I've had so many conversations over the years and reflected on those and learnt so much that I just wanted to start to record them. So this morning, I've got a guest with me that I'm going to introduce you to. Her name's Nicole Gabriel. Okay, so let me just give you a bit of background. I've done a little bit of research, so I'm just going to read it, so bear with me. Okay, so Nicole's a psychologist. She's got a master's degree in Occupational and Organisational Psychology, MSc, and HR Management, MA. She's a member of the British Psychological Society and an associate member of the International Society of Coaching Psychologists. She uses proven and evidence-based principles within her coaching practice. But when she was in her 30s and she was in a really successful HR management career, she started to feel this kind of unease about it. And that's why I really wanted to bring her on to the call this morning. I'm going to let her kind of take it from there. It's really very much about eco-psychology and where that fits into where she is now, and also pulling those threads of our passions together and how they can influence a business, create a business. So I'm just gonna introduce you to Nicole and we'll see. Hello.
Hello, Julia.
Lovely to see you.
Yes, you too.
Thank you for joining me.
You're very welcome. Yes, be interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, so is that more or less about right? Have I got that about right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely my early to mid 30s was a real struggle for me work-wise, because I knew I was in the wrong place but didn't know where the right place was. And it's taken an awfully long time to get to where I think is the right place, an awfully long time. Lots of reasons for that. And the eco-psychology bit, and I'll talk a bit more about what that is in a minute, it's been quite late to the game, really. And it's one of those things that I look back and I think, God, it was so obvious. But no, at the time, and there's always often a lot of sort of unlayering of the onion, I like to call it, particularly where you've got, like I had, a lot of expectations that you've put on yourself that are actually other people's stuff. So it can take a long time to kind of filter through all of that and really get back to what you're about. And that sort of process for me is all back to front. I'll talk about eco-psychology in a minute, but I might as well talk about this. It's been a process really of having to go right back to, what are my values? Because there's lots of things that you can feel passionate about and interested in, but unless they somehow link you to your core values and what they are, it's quite difficult to consciously anyway look to apply those things. And that's, I suppose, the messy process that I've gone through, is that whole, well, what are my values, and then what am I interested in, even talk about bringing your passions together. I think there was a time when I wasn't even sure what they were.
And how can you help to identify those if you don't, like you said, maybe you've had, you've been bringing up a young family and that sort of thing. I mean, how do you even start with something like that?
Yeah, so for me, the process has been a sort of lots of different things, but the things that have really helped me, I think, were fairly basic things, like just thinking back to when you were a child. What were the things that you used to like doing? And it sounds a really silly thing to say, but actually when you go back to that, and that's when I first started thinking, actually I used to spend a lot of time sitting picking flowers and looking at flowers and learning about flowers and butterflies, and I really used to love spending time doing that. Why don't I do that more now? So that was one of those things. The other thing that I found a really helpful thing to do, which I came out of my reading of Marianne Cantwell's Free Range Humans book, was an exercise where you kind of visualize that you've got a year ahead of you where you haven't got your day-to-day responsibilities. It's a really difficult thing to imagine, but you haven't got all your day-to-day responsibilities. You haven't got to worry about money. How would you spend that year? So, you know, for some people that might mean traveling the world. For other people, it might mean they'd go and retrain and do something else or whatever. But if you can sort of move through that barrier of, oh yeah, but I can't do that because I'd have to get back for the school run. It is a really difficult thing to do. But when you start looking at your life in that way, you can really begin to see the things that are, if you didn't have them in your life, you would feel really less like you.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it, actually.
Yeah. So, and that process really helped me, I think. And then that overlaid with an exercise I did creating a vision board. A lot of coaches talk about these vision boards. For me, actually, it was quite transformational doing it. I think timing is probably everything. But I just went through this process probably a couple of years ago now of doing this vision board, thinking, you know, if it's something I'm going to be doing with my coachees, I probably need to experience it. So I just went through this process of, you know, lots of magazines and newspapers in front of me, a massive, great big board, and just asked myself the question, what do you want your life to look like? And out of that came this massive board full of green and nature and walking in the mountains and fresh air and growing your own stuff and, you know, all of that. And it was amazing. It just made sense. And that's when this whole idea of nature needing to be a big part of my life in a more conscious way started, I think. You know, and some of that was about, you know, where I want to live, but some of it's about, you know, my work. So then it was about, for me, because some people would choose to say they, you know, they have very defined passions, whatever you want to call it, and I know someone who has sort of two very clear passions and they're very separate, and that's how they want to keep them. So, you know, they have a job, which is one thing, and then they have something else which they absolutely love doing. But never have they thought about wanting to bring those things together. They're very separate things. And sometimes we have passions that we love doing and we love them for the sake of doing them, and we don't want them to become part of our working life. And I think that's very important as well, because as soon as you put money pressure on something, and I think what's the lady that wrote Eat, Pray, Love?
Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yes. So she talks about this, you know, as a writer, you know, you can't, if you put pressure on yourself to write, your creative process disappears and you lose your enjoyment of it. So I think she would say that if you're a writer, you have to have another job to bring the money in, because that takes the pressure off the writing. And I think the same is probably true of a lot of those kind of things. But I sort of tried that process for me and it didn't work. And I don't know if it's because, you know, I am a highly sensitive person, and there is a lot of research to say that highly sensitive people really struggle with work that isn't meaningful for them. So whether that is part of it, I don't know. But anyway, so, you know, I kind of had this sort of well-being thing going on in my head, which has been around in my sort of work life brain for a very long time. Started out when I did my occupational psychology, you know, stress management, was very interested in how workplaces affected us and our stress levels and things, and that's still very much an interest of mine. And so my whole well-being thing stemmed from there, and that's the path that I went down. But as soon as this sort of nature stuff started coming along, I started thinking, yeah, see, this whole, and I was struggling to get going with my business, and I kept thinking, well, why is that? Because I'm, you know, I'm set up to do what I said I always wanted to do, which is the whole well-being thing. I've done the training, I've done, and something was stopping me. And I think, and this is where the values bit comes in. So I am waffling a bit now, but
no, carry on.
It will all come back together. This is where the values bit came in for me, because it didn't feel authentic, and authenticity for me is a really core value. And as soon as I tapped into that whole nature piece, it all started to fall into place. Because actually for me, our well-being is so bedded in nature, and it's such a key part of who I am as well, that's when I thought, actually, I need to try and bring these things together, because I can't separate them out. You know, I spent a long time looking at evolutionary psychology and recognizing that our mind and body are not separate things, and that's exactly the same as we're not separate from nature, and that's where the eco-psychology bit comes in. But before I kind of talk about eco-psychology, the other strand for me that I found really helpful in this whole passions thing was an approach to finding your passion, which says, stop thinking about your passion as a thing, because the minute you start thinking about it as a thing, you put pressure on that thing. And also, we can change the things that we feel passionate about. So I don't think nature I'll ever lose, but you know, if I look at my son as he was little, you know, he would be absolutely obsessed with one thing, and that would be his passion, but then he'd move on to something else. And so the suggestion there was, don't think about it as a thing. Try and identify the golden thread that is almost defining what you're about, how you see things, how you are passionate about being and doing. So I'll explain what mine is, and that will help explain it. When I looked back at all the things that I like doing, both at work and outside of work, and as a child, and even, you know, looking at writing an essay or making a card, the thing that for me binds everything together, my golden thread, is making sense of things. It's creating a whole out of different bits. And that applies to everything that I do. It might be the way I declutter my house. I want to create a whole flow where it feels like a whole thing. It's in harmony. It might be making the jewelry that I make. It's about taking, you know, a piece of silver, a piece of sea glass, a shell, and making something whole out of it. It might be my conceptual argument. It might be I'm putting an argument together as about why, you know, going back to my A-level history, why Britain was responsible for the Second World War. And together, you know, different arguments into a whole. So that is my underlying golden thread. So it then doesn't matter what interest I apply that to. That is me. And so it keeps you alongside your values. It sort of keeps you grounded, and that allows you, actually, it freed me to look at the different bits that I was trying to pull together to put them in a whole, because I was struggling with the whole wellbeing thing. And Julia, you'll know, because you've been helping me with some of that work, that it's been a very convoluted process. And on the face of it, it did make sense, but it didn't make sense because it wasn't connecting in with my authentic self. It was, you know, it was a label, it was well-being, but well-being in what way? And that bit didn't make sense. And then as soon as I reframed what I was talking about to stop being about well-being and to start being about making sense of things, it all made sense. Which, you know, for me is really important.
And where does the so we took, when we bring that back to kind of the rise of this eco-psychology now, and how does that, I understand that now you've created this business with that at the very heart of it, really. So is there any evidence out there that can tell us what what's the word I'm looking for, effect that those environments, those natural environments have? I always feel like it's almost like having, or the way that I see your business is that it's having this extra element to it, this extra coach in the room, if you like. So there's you, and then there's nature, and then nature is very much this second coach, and you're bringing the two together.
And that is a brilliant way of talking about it. And actually, when you look at ecotherapy, which is an applied version of eco-psychology, that's what they would often say. So eco-psychology is kind of an approach to how you operate, I guess. It's not like a subdiscipline of psychology, because it draws on, you know, so many other disciplines. So ecology being one, obviously, but also sociology, anthropology, loads, biology. And the basic premise of eco-psychology is that we are not separate from nature. We are at unity with nature. And when you think about us as a mammalian species that has evolved to live on this planet, it makes absolute sense that that is the case. And ecotherapy, which would be things like, you know, going out into the woods and using psychotherapeutic skills to help someone with depression, anxiety get better, includes also things like horticultural therapy, where people are encouraged to, you know, go out and grow things in the garden, or animal therapies, which again, you know, horses are a good example, often used to help with anxiety and depression. Anything really that connects you, and things like the blue and green exercise that people are encouraged to do, so that's sort of exercising in and around water or exercising outside, all proven to be really beneficial to our health. And that's where eco-psychology, I suppose, is most prominently known in these sort of ecotherapeutic contexts of helping you get well again. And there is a lot of evidence to show that time spent in nature reduces our stress levels, reduces anxiety, reduces brooding, I read the other day. And it does that, I suppose, in a variety of ways. So and a lot of it is neurochemical. So if we forest bathing is another one that's, you know, becoming more, another type of ecotherapy, which is becoming more commonplace. You see a lot of talk about that now. But that's about, you know, actively utilizing that interaction we have with plants, and woodlands are good places to do it because obviously there's a lot of trees, but trees release something called phytoncides. It's like they're chemicals that they release that we absorb. And those phytoncides not only help reduce our stress levels, but they also increase our production of what are called natural killer cells. So they boost our immune system. So time spent in woodland, in around plants, but obviously trees are bigger, so we get more from them, actually boosts our immune system. And that's a very chemical thing. It's not a woo psychological effect. It is a very chemical effect that it has on our body. So it boosts our immune system. The sort of flip side of reducing our stress levels is it also activates our parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the part of our nervous system that produces all the sort of endorphins and things. So it's like a double effect. It reduces our stress and increases our and that again has a calming effect on us, and that's why it's so good at reducing our stress levels. And going back to the phytoncides, when you go out and you smell that sort of fresh green smell, that's what that is. That is the sort of things coming off the plants that we sense or absorb. So much like we absorb vitamin D from the sun, you know, we absorb those phytoncides from being outside. And that's why it's so important to be outside. And that's, you know, one of the reasons why green exercise is good for you. But there's lots of other evidence as well. I mean, thinking about, you know, you're in the creative profession, and from a creative point of view, it also provides that sort of third forum, if you like. And I've been thinking about this and looking at the research as well. And I think some of that is when you're outside, we're using more of our senses than we are when we're inside. It's a very multi-sensory experience. And I think, you know, when we're stuck in our houses, we're not using our smell as much, we're not using our sense of touch often as much, and being out in nature just allows us to be more like we're designed to be, and that in itself is quite relaxing. But linked to that is some research which is showing that in our day-to-day lives we use our prefrontal cortex, which is the thing that makes us human, an awful lot. It's the problem solving center of our brain, and that's where we do all the evaluation, the analysis. It's the bit of our brain that starts all the gremlins popping up that, you know, oh, you're not good enough. That's where that all happens. And it's overused really in our day-to-day lives. And I think what the research is starting to evidence is that when we go out into nature, it almost allows our brain to reset to its default networks. So it almost switches off that prefrontal cortex a bit and allows that to kind of regenerate back to our default setting of, I suppose, being more responsive to what's around us and more in the moment. So it's much easier to be mindful outside, I think, than
Mm.
inside. And I think that's part of the reason. And allowing that prefrontal cortex to have a bit of a break and to regenerate is what then allows those creative processes to kind of burst forth. You know, it gives it a rest.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I find that definitely. Yeah. That
Yeah.
you need that headspace to allow that creative process to get going, to kick in. Whereas if
Yeah.
it's constantly crowded all the time with emails and the phone, you never get that chance for it just to have that space for, you know, inspiration to strike or creativity to strike. And
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So it's
Yeah.
such a great gateway to that.
Agreed, because I think it then allows you to not just pay attention and notice and all the mindful things, but it allows you to have the time and the space to get curious about things and to wonder about things. And mind wandering is another thing that there's a lot of research around. Just allowing your mind to wander is so important for creativity and problem solving.
Yeah.
And when we're stuck in that place of analysis and evaluation, our minds are not given that space to wander. So again, being out in nature, there's a lot of evidence to show that that mind wandering ability is really beneficial for creativity, innovation, problem solving. Yeah. So in that way, that's where nature becomes that sort of third person in the room, because it's almost in eliciting out of you. And I was, you know, again, almost thinking of it this morning, it's almost like another way of doing a vision board, because it helps bring out what's subconsciously in there that we perhaps don't realize. You know, I wrote a blog yesterday about dandelions and, you know, lessons we can learn from dandelions, because I suddenly realized I've been taking an awful lot of photographs of dandelions lately, and you know, it didn't take me very long to just sit down and think, well, okay, what is the dandelion telling me? And actually, you know, 7 lessons about your life just from looking at and thinking about a dandelion.
That's amazing.
And, you know, that is amazing. And I think it is about, you know, you can see what you're drawn to when you go out, and that in itself, when you start, you know, exploring that and getting curious with that and allowing your mind to wander a bit, taps into whatever it is that's going on for you. And I think, you know, if there's something that's troubling you, or you're just stuck with something, you hear so many inventors tell stories of, you know, going outside and that inspiration coming. I mean, the obvious one is the apple dropping on the head and that inspiration striking. But you know, I've read so many, you know, Einstein would be one, and so many who say the same thing. And it's just observing and looking, and sometimes for days, looking at the same thing for days, being drawn to something, and then suddenly something will spike. It allows those sort of less obvious networks to kind of talk to each other. And nature's a good way of doing it. It's almost, I've been thinking as well, it's almost like when you get guidance about how to talk to a teenager, you know, don't talk directly to them, do something so that, you know, it takes the pressure off. And it's a bit like that, I think. You know, I read something about nature being really good as well for reducing anxiety and depression and those sorts of things, partly because it's a non-judgmental space. You know, how often do you get to go somewhere where you just don't feel that anybody is paying any attention to what you're wearing, or, you know, the fact you haven't brushed your hair, or, you know, you're tall, short, fat, thin, not speaking coherently, you know, whatever. Nature doesn't care. And that's another reason it's a really good place to be, because we're not in that place of being judged.
So in your workshops and the collaborations that you do, what kind of activities would you do in those workshops?
So part of the collaboration is about getting the space right, because obviously for me, being in a natural environment is really important. So I think there's a lot of benefit to be had in being situated in a little wood to have your chat, even if you're stuck in a caravan, as it might be, a glampy caravan. But the last one that I ran, which was, I sort of titled a winter wellbeing workshop, I'd taken sort of inspiration from the season of winter for the activities that we did. So it was things like letting go. old things. So much like a leaf might drop to conserve energy, it's about using that as a metaphor for things that you need to let go of to allow yourself to move forward and conserve your own energy, because we lose a lot of energy in holding on to, you know, resentments or cogitating and ruminating over things that are actually not that helpful. So it's taking that sort of cognitive principle of letting go of something that's really holding you back, but getting them to, you know, I got the delegates to you know, just write on it was actually I was going to do a leaf, but the time of year they were all really soggy. So I used instead some sugar paper flowers that I'd found with edible ink, and got them to just write on that and then just let go into the wind. It's a very sort of physical depiction of letting go. So that's one example. Another example is taken from a sort of deep ecology exercise. That's another applied eco-psychology thing. I got them to just go for a walk in the woods and find a sit spot and just sit and try and be mindful and settle and calm the mind. And then on their meanders, I just got them to kind of find something that resonated with them, and then write a poem about it. And that allowed them to sort of get that connection with nature, I suppose. I can't remember what else I did. Tell me something about winter. What does winter mean to you?
Cold. It means bare trees. Ice. It means what else does it mean to me? There was a word that, what was the word? It was on your blog. Crudel. Yes. Yeah, I love that word.
Yeah. So we talked then about, you know, how you can, I suppose, reframe things. So you know, crudling is a lovely word. It just means sort of huddling together against the cold, and that, you know, it is a very wintry thing. But that's about, you know, I suppose, a double-edged thing. It's about reframing things. So how can we, if we look at things differently, it allows us to have a different relationship with that thing. And that takes us right back to again, cognitive behavioral psychology, which is about, you know, it's not the thing that bothers you, it's your reaction to the thing. And so, you know, the same, that illustrating winter, you know, you can actually see winter in a positive way. A lot of people hate winter because it's dark and it's gloomy, and it's often, we often think it's wet. I don't think it's often as wet as we think it is, but you know, reframing it into a more crudely sense allows us to see that actually there are some real benefits to winter. It's an opportunity, and gratitude, that was where that was going. That was the exercise we did on gratitude. You know, what it allows us to see gratitude in things that we wouldn't necessarily normally appreciate, and I think it's often the small things that make the difference.
Absolutely. So when you're making your jewellery, have you made jewellery for quite a long time? Is that something you've always done, or?
I've dabbled quite badly on and off for quite a while, and I had a first stab at silver clay making. So I use silver clay and sea glass and things probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and it wasn't very successful. And then, having asked for a load of stuff for Christmas, I then got scared and didn't do it again for ages because it's quite expensive. And I kept thinking, but when I did my coaching training, it was one of the things that came up in one of the triad practice sessions we did, that it's, you know, I realized how futile it was having that stuff in a box, and it was completely pointless it being stuck in a box. And so, you know, I did some work on myself and sort of got over that whole thing about it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to, it doesn't matter. It's far better to, you know, use it and learn something from it and throw it in the bin than it is for it to be sat unused in the box. So probably about a couple of years ago, and then I started dabbling in it again, and then I got spurred. It was only about a year ago, just over a year ago. In fact, it wasn't even that long ago, 6 months ago, in the run up to Christmas. The local social club wanted to put on a craft fair, and somebody just said, "Oh, are you going to do some jewellery, Nicole?" And I went, "Nah." And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, actually, why not? I keep saying I'm going to do it. I love doing it. I've got all this sea glass that I've been collecting to make jewellery with for years and years and years, and I've never done it. Why don't I just do it? Because actually, it doesn't matter if it all goes
Yes,
pear-shaped.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
So probably, really, only for about a year,
Mm.
pulling all of this stuff together. But it's one of those things, isn't it? All the times you tried doing different things before gives you the skills and the tools to
That's right. Yeah.
to do it. So yeah, but again, it's that whole thing. It's brought together my love of nature,
Yeah,
and I do like
absolutely.
tinkering and crafting. And one of the things that often puts me off doing crafts, because years ago I used to make cards and people would say, oh, why don't you sell them?
Yeah.
And the reason was very simple. I hate the boredom of doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
Plus no margin in selling cards. But the benefit of doing the jewelry the way I do it is it's quite bespoke. So each piece is different, and each piece of glass that you're working with is different. So that serves my need for variety in a way that other craft doesn't. So yeah.
And where can we, so online, you're online, so where can we find you?
So I'm on Instagram for my jewelry and for coaching, actually. So jewelry is Hugged by Nature. Which I was actually going to use for coaching, but then another mutual friend of ours said, oh, that would be great for your jewellery.
Yeah.
And she was right, it was. So that's Hugged by Nature. And I haven't got a shop on there at the moment, but you can see some of my work on there and always message me if there's anything you want. And Serene Mind Coaching for coaching, similarly on Instagram. And yeah, so, and who knows, maybe my jewellery making will make its way into my coaching somehow.
Exactly. Why not?
Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for just having a chat today, and it's just been absolutely fascinating for me. So thanks ever so much for your time, and it's been really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Very welcome.